Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Margin for Error. I'm excited today because we have Clay Ostrom, founder and strategist at Nap and Fire, a brand strategy agency that helps businesses navigate the messy middle of growth by aligning their core purpose with data. They don't just make things look pretty, they build the map of how a business actually wins in its category. Clay, thanks for being here.
It is my pleasure. I always love our conversations. Really looking forward to chatting today.
So, really, to get started, can you tell our listeners what Map and Fire does in your own words and what gap you saw in the market that traditional agencies were just missing?
Yeah, great question. So, Map and Fire is a market research and brand strategy agency. It has been in existence now for going on 11 years, which is kind of crazy. It's by a long measure the longest time I've ever been in one job. So that's always exciting to think about. But yeah, we do a lot of market research work. We do brand strategy work, which to me ultimately means a lot of work on positioning. We do some work on things like purpose and mission and things like that as well. But I always think of the positioning and the messaging as being the heart and soul of really what we do. And the research side is how we make those decisions and make those decisions make sense. And that's, I guess, when I think about like, why are we different or how did we find a space to operate here? It really is that combination. It's really leaning into the research side. I think a lot of brand strategy work is often, not always, but often a little bit more of maybe a creative exercise. And we really come at it from a data first perspective and really try to make sure everything we do is grounded in the voice of the customer and really understanding their needs and desires.
And I got to say, just kind of talking about your journey to starting and now almost in year 9 of Map and Fire, one of the things I found always fascinating is your background. You have your background blends design, technology, strategy. Can you share what was your journey before founding Map and Fire?
Yeah. What do we have? 3 hours? Can I? Yeah, I think every entrepreneur, at least every entrepreneur I've ever talked to has some kind of weird path that they've gone on to get to where they are. And I think I'm kind of no different. I started off with a degree in computer science and planned on initially being a developer. And I was a developer for several years, but I always describe myself as being a little bit of like a split personality because I love data. I love seeing how things work and pulling them apart. But I also love the creative expression of things. And I love writing and design and art and all these things. And I kind of spent a good chunk of my career trying to figure out how do we get these things to fit together in some way that I can make money. And I think I've eventually came to strategy and brand strategy as a way to sort of marry those things. And then again, I like to think that that background in computer science and sort of that analytical point of view helped give me a different perspective on brand strategy than other people who might come up through different paths.
Yeah. In your past life, was there a defining moment or an experience that kind of led you to believe that branding needed a more disciplined, research based kind of approach?
Well, I think a lot of it was formed by the job I had previously. I worked at another agency and it was a great experience. I got to work on some big brands. I got to sit in rooms with big thought leaders and people at big companies and get to sort of peek a little bit behind the curtain, just to see like how some of those things worked. But I will say like that agency was definitely much more of a traditional creative agency. We would get people in a room together. We would brainstorm ideas and it was fun. I mean, a lot of that work was really fun,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of, hey, here's an idea that we had. Let's pitch it to the client. Let's see if they go for it. Hopefully they do. Hopefully they'll pay us and then we'll build it and then we'll launch it and then it'll be a thing. And it was always, again, we did a lot of great work there, but it was sort of missing that element of why are we doing this and what is this actually grounded in and why do we think this will work outside of our own gut instinct of, well, we've done similar stuff and it kind of worked. And I think that just never quite sat right with me. And that again goes back to this background of being a little more analytical and science minded. Just I don't want to just do stuff to do stuff. I kind of want to know why. And I want to know hopefully a little bit more of why will this work, or how can we best ensure that it will work. We never know for sure, but maybe we can at least reduce the noise a little bit.
Building off the why is this important? Why are we doing this? It makes me think of, you know, this, I think something that I've heard you say, strategy first growth. Many business owners, entrepreneurs, founders think of strategy as something you might do once a year, maybe in a retreat. How do you define strategy, particularly brand strategy, in a way that's actionable for lean, fast moving teams?
Yeah, that's kind of the other piece of what I think what we do at Map and Fire is maybe a little different than maybe traditional agencies. Is I am also a big believer in working as lean as possible and doing I always kind of think about it as like, what's the least amount we can do to try to answer the most important questions, and then let's get that into market and test it and see how people actually react to it. And I think that's the thing that people get hung up on sometimes with strategy work, is thinking that it's got to be this huge endeavor, it's got to be this multi-month process, we're going to plan for the next 5 years and we're going to do all this great thinking, and then you just end up either getting stuck in your own thinking, or you create a big, beautiful deck that collects dust and nobody ever looks at it again. And I just think you get so much more out of doing some upfront thinking, doing some upfront research, but then get it into action as quickly as you can, get it in front of people so that you can see again what, the rubber meets the road, and kind of see how people actually respond to it. Because at the end of the day, that's the thing we all have to do. You can strategize all day, you can research all day. You never really know, but until you get it in front of people.
So I guess even on that note, I do recall you referring to branding as a beyond the creative part, but also as a business tool. So how do you convince a skeptical, numbers-driven founder that the word brand isn't just a fluffy thing to work on, but really a measurable driver of growth and ROI?
Well, I'll start off by saying I suck as a salesperson. So so part of my sales process is knowing that I am never going to convince anybody of anything really. All I'm going to do is tell you how we work, and if you think it makes sense to you, fantastic, let's do some great work together. So that's just to say that I think at least at this point with where we are as a business, generally speaking, people come to us mostly with the right mentality of they've pre-qualified themselves to say, we kind of align with your thinking and we want to work with you for a reason. That being said, if somebody came to me and was a little more skeptical, I would just say we're at a really interesting point in time right now, I think, with brand. And I'd be really curious to hear what you're seeing on your side with all your work. But I feel like brand is in a bit of a revival mode right now. And I think interestingly, I wouldn't have predicted this a few years ago, but interestingly, I think the movement of AI has really put a new focus on brand. Technology is becoming, almost a non-moat for most companies now that the time to create features and functionality and all these things is basically reaching zero. You've got to think about other things. You've got to really think about the relationship that you're building and the emotional connection that you're making with people, um and how are you uniquely positioned in the market to be memorable, to actually stick in people's minds. And these things can't be done, really, I don't think, unless you're really thinking about your brand and your strategy. And
You talked a little bit about how your own process, and you will share with a potential client the way that you and Map and Fire work. Can you walk us through your typical process when you engage with a new client, from that kind of first conversation to when they're positioned and ready to grow?
yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, my perspective has evolved over the past 10 years now, where We used to be a little bit of the inverse of we do brand strategy with a layer of research. And now I really think about it as we do research, which leads into strategy. Like the research piece is so fundamental to everything we do. And I think, as we were saying, like as AI is continuing to kind of shape things and change our perception of what's possible and how quickly things evolve, research has maintained as this pillar of, I don't know, insight and information that like just hasn't changed or hasn't gone away at all. At least not yet. I know some people use synthetic research and do some, use AI for some of these things to approximate. But from what I've seen and the founders that we talk to, everyone is still a big, big believer in we need to talk to real people. We need their real insights. We need their opinions. And that's how we're going to form, the direction of where we go with things. So that's where we always start. We always start with some mix, generally some mix of quantitative and qualitative research. So we're doing a market survey, we're doing some interviews with customers or potential customers, and then using that to form an initial basis of here's what we've heard, here's where we think there are opportunities, here's where we see gaps in the market, and then we get into more of the core strategy. And in a typical engagement, when we're working on positioning, it's broken down essentially into three parts. I won't go too long on this, but just to say that it's essentially, I think of it as an intersection of three circles of customer, competition, and offering. And so we spend a lot of time first and foremost on customers. We really want to know not just who they are demographically, but we really want to get into their behavior. And I always tell people, and I know you've heard me talk about this before, but investing in buyer psychology and how people think and make decisions is probably one of the best, in terms of ROI, that's one of the best things you can spend your time on, because the tech changes all the time, but people's brains and how we think and make decisions kind of is the same now as it was 100 years ago or probably longer. And that's always got to be the cornerstone of what we work on is how do our customers think? How do they make decisions? From there it goes into looking at the competitive space. Where are there gaps? Where can we find some separation from the other solutions out there? And then the last part is your actual offering. And a lot of people start with that. A lot of people think we start with the offering, we start with the features, we start with the thing we're giving people. But for us, that's more the last part that we look at. And then it's more about how does that fit with what we understand about our customers and where there are opportunities in the market. So it's kind of this intersection of those three things.
Of those three things, which one do you find are usually the most either misaligned or misunderstood with a company or client that you work with?
Interestingly, I think it's mostly the customers. it's quite often that there's a lot of assumptions that have been made, sometimes over the course of years, have been made about who their customers are and what they think that they want. And sometimes that's because the founder maybe was one of those customers once upon a time, or maybe they've just spent so much time thinking about it that they just think they know at this point what everybody wants. But I have yet to run a research portion of our work where we didn't have some significant aha moment where people or the founders are like, holy crap, that is literally the opposite of what we thought our customers wanted or how they thought about these things. And again, that's the stuff that ends up sending you off in a weird direction where you're like, why are people not responding to this? Or why are we plateaued for some reason? And it's a lot of the time, it comes back to those assumptions that people have made. And then that ends up guiding you for months or years, possibly in the wrong direction. So yeah, it's oddly enough, the thing that you would think you would understand the best, customers, is not always the case.
Just on that example, it sounds like once they have this oh my goodness moment or that aha moment of this epiphany of what they thought they knew and what they were learning working with you, is there an example you could think of where the trajectory of what they ended up doing next changed?
Yeah, there was a company specifically around one of those aha moments. There was a company that we worked with in the medical space, and they founders are deep experts in this space. And they had some very strong perceptions of who their customers often compared them to. So they're in the medical space, but specifically in the aesthetic space. So thinking about aesthetic improvements to your look, to your skin, to your face or your body. And they were convinced that it was really other aesthetic health providers that their customers really only thought about, that they would only be thinking kind of a direct competitor head to head. Well, we ended up doing this research and it showed that their customers, first and foremost, think about dermatologists and MD doctors as the go-to source for this kind of work. That's who they trusted more than anyone else. And it completely shifted their whole perception of how they were approaching the market, because they were coming at it from a kind of aesthetic first point of view and thinking about customer service and the aesthetic side of things. And it turned out that their customers really cared about the medical expertise of what they were providing. And that became like a big shift around how they positioned themselves and separated themselves from some of their other competitors, because they actually had a lot of background in some of the medical side, but they were kind of downplaying it. They weren't leaning into that side of things because they thought their customers didn't care, or just didn't, it wasn't, top of mind. So anyway, that was a case where we came in, they kind of had this one position for their entire brand, and we really shifted it and kind of pointed them in another direction after that. And it's made a big difference.
Interesting. Interesting. It's fascinating how, through your work, you're able to navigate and help kind of identify, these, alternative kind of viewpoints and, real areas of credibility for a particular brand. So that's a great example. Yeah. So as you know, the name of this show is Margin for Error. So in the world of brand strategy, what is the cost of getting your positioning wrong early on? How much room for error do you think a founder or an entrepreneur realistically have?
It is a really interesting question. And I think there's an interesting perception about positioning, brand strategy, this sort of idea that these are things that come later in the process, or these are things that we can work on once we've established ourselves or further down the road. This is not for startups. This is not for young companies. I'm polar opposite of that. I think this is stuff that you work on day one. I think this is stuff that you work on before you work on literally anything else, ideally. And I think there's a big cost to not doing it. Like we were saying before, you can never know all the answers. You'll never know exactly what's going to work in the market or exactly how your customers think about things. But we can absolutely reduce the noise. When you start off, you can sort of think about like there's just this giant wavelength of noise that you're sort of going against. And we can't remove that. But what we can do is at least narrow it down so that we can say, within this realm or this bound, we can pretty safely bet that our answer is somewhere in here. And to me, that's what you're trying to do at the beginning. You're trying to reduce the noise, create some focus, and then start to do some experimenting, take some chances. And that might mean that there might be a few different segments that you're sort of looking at initially, but you've got to do some initial testing with that, and you've got to like test things out. So I think the cost of it ultimately is, if you don't do that, you just might end up spinning your wheels for a really, really long time. If your decision is, well, we're not going to do the strategy, we're not going to do the research, we'll just go to market, try to figure it out. You might figure it out, but will you figure it out in time? Will you figure it out before your runway runs out? Um, will you waste a year of your life or a couple years of your life just testing it out and trying to figure it out on the fly? I think a lot of entrepreneurs do end up doing some path like that. But yeah, I think the cost is like everything else. It's like time and money. And for most of us, those are limited resources.
You have sat on both sides. You've been obviously an operator, been on the agency side, another agency, and now as an entrepreneur building Map and Fire. As you have gone through the last nearly 10 years of growing your agency, what has been your own kind of challenges as an entrepreneur, and what have those challenges and experiences taught you about your own brand, Map and Fire?
Yeah. Well, I would love to say that I followed my own advice perfectly to a T and made no mistakes. And of course, did all the research day one and did everything just right. Obviously, that's not true. Yeah, I've learned a lot. I think it was kind of interesting coming out of the previous agency. it was very much a like jumping in with both feet and just kind of going for it, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs can probably resonate with that mode of thinking. It's a little bit like the classic analogy. It's like having a kid. Like you're never ready. And if you actually knew how much work it was going to be, you probably would never even attempt it. But most of us who do this kind of stuff are wired to think optimistically. We're sort of wired to think like, of course I'll figure it out. And of course, I- how I think about this stuff is better than how I've seen other people think about it. So I've got an edge of some kind. So that sort of gets us to make the leap. But yeah, I mean, early on, Map and Fire was building websites and doing strategy work and doing UX work and doing all kinds of stuff. And it's taken time to narrow that down and kind of eat our own dog food and niche down more and get more specific. And I would say it's probably been in the last 3 years or so where I feel like we finally found a real strong spot in the market to own. But that did take time. And we had success before that too. So it wasn't like we were just sort of floundering that whole time. I think we wouldn't have lasted if we were. But in terms of feeling really solid about here's what we're about, here's our identity, here's our positioning, that did take some time to kind of narrow down. But I do feel, I mean, I don't know. I say this like every day you kind of wake up and you're like I don't know, do I?
So, how does a brand stay human and differentiated when the barriers to entry for creating a professional looking brand are lower than ever?
Well, I think the key there is it's the human. You said earlier you were talking about sort of the authenticity that brands are looking to capture. And I think that is what I keep coming back to because yes, AI is making certain aspects of content creation and everything else that we do more efficient. We can technically do more of it. But what is actually making an impact? What's actually breaking through and connecting with people? And it's ultimately, I think, coming back to the unique perspective that you have, the unique experience that you have, sharing that authentically with other people. I think we've seen plenty of examples now of founder led brands where the founder is able to build a personality and a connection with an audience simply by sharing their journey, their experience, the ups and downs of what they're building. That ends up creating a relationship with people that no one else can replicate. No one else will have that same story. No one else will have that same set of experiences. So that's what I think is going to continue to win in the market. And we see it with actual data through traditional SEO, but now GEO. We see things coming through, what are LLMs picking up, at least in terms of like real time kind of access to things, unique perspectives, because the cookie cutter stuff is now sort of table stakes. It's just, AI can kind of generate the baseline itself. So it's what are you adding on top of that? What unique perspective are you adding on top of that? And that, luckily, at least for a while, I hope, will keep humans necessary in this economy. But I think that's our moat as founders and as builders. I think is our unique perspectives and points of view.
Now, as we continue to think about the future, again, if we bring it back to you as an entrepreneur and also Map and Fire as an agency, where do you see Map and Fire going in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, the other big thing that I've been working on is our product Smoke Ladder, which is AI. It's our AI tool that we built around positioning and messaging specifically. So it takes a lot of the frameworks and some of the processes that we've used now for 10 years on the consulting and agency side and productize that so that brands can basically do analysis of their own brand and also their competitors, compare and contrast, find points of differentiation. Again, kind of taking that data perspective on positioning. And that's where I plan on continuing to invest. And it's not to say that Map and Fire will be going away, but I think I'm going to be putting more and more effort onto the product side and letting the service side live alongside it and continue to thrive and pay most of the bills for right now. But as a dev guy, as a computer science guy, and a product guy, my heart has always been a little bit more on that product side. And so that's where I kind of see the company going over the next however many years. I think there's going to be the product side will continue to grow, the service side can continue to do its thing, but I really want that, the product thing to become more of a bigger piece of the pie, I guess.
So, for business owners or entrepreneurs listening in who feel like their brand is stuck, what are some of the signs that their strategy is broken, and where do you think they should start?
Yeah, I think there's always a few different signals you can think about. Being obviously the big one is, how's revenue going? Like, are you continuing to grow? Have you plateaued? Are you bringing in opportunities? But I think in addition to that, to go a layer deeper, it's when people do come in, are they the right fit? I said this at the very beginning, that I love that we're at the point now where people are self-qualifying, generally speaking, when they come to Map and Fire. And that's because we have a lot of content out there. I've spent a lot of time talking about my perspective on strategy and positioning and data, blah, blah, blah. And people have consumed that and seen our work and have come into work with us because of that. And so I can tell pretty quickly now if somebody comes in and they are asking for services that we don't do, or want to work a different way than how we typically work. To me, that's a signal of our positioning is off, or our strategy is off, our brand is off. So I think that to me is, again, we come back to this idea of the customer. It's listening to the customer. What are they telling you? What is the market telling you? Because if people are continuously coming to you and asking for things you don't do, or wanting to work, or trying to force you to work their way as opposed to what you are uniquely suited to do, that to me is a signal that there's some disconnect. Either your positioning is off, your messaging isn't communicating your positioning properly, or you're just not spreading that word enough, and there's not enough awareness in general about who you are and what you do.
So, obviously, you building new products, working with what I imagine are extremely interesting brands and companies. How do you personally stay sharp? Are there books, mental models, routines that help you kind of maintain the big picture for your clients?
I think one of the things that I do, probably the best regular exercise that I get, is spending time on LinkedIn, which I know is a love hate for a lot of people. um, but I think, not to go off on a tangent about LinkedIn, but I think there's sort of a right way and a wrong way to be on LinkedIn. And I think a lot of people view it as a necessary evil. They'll go on, do the bare minimum, maybe add a couple comment or a like here and there, maybe post a little bit of their own stuff. The reason I find it really valuable is because I really engage and I really read people's content, and I try as best I can to leave thoughtful comments and interact with the person who, whatever they posted. And to me, that's just always been a great way to consistently challenge myself, challenge my own thinking. Now, you got to follow good quality people, because there's plenty of, again, noise and kind of whatever out there that's maybe not so useful. If you look and if you spend some time, like, there are some really, really smart people on LinkedIn who are posting great ideas, great thoughts. And I just, again, I've worked on positioning stuff for a long time, but I still find people now who have also been working on positioning just as long as I have, or longer, and have a different perspective on it or a different thought about it. And whether I agree with it or not, it's a great way to sharpen, like you said, what your point of view is and how it compares and contrasts with other people. To me, that conversation, that ongoing conversation with other people, is the best way, outside of obviously talking to our customers and doing all the work and all those things. I think that's just an underrated way to stay sharp, because it will challenge you. It'll challenge how you think. If you invest the time, and I think do it, quote unquote, right.
Hopefully, it sounds to me like one of the biggest value add is through actually that human to human connection, which is
Exactly.
in spite of all the technology and the changes that we're seeing today.
Yeah,
But
exactly. It's this is a case where I would say, don't let AI come into the mix. Don't rely on an AI to write your comments for you, or certainly not to write your posts. If you are going to post, spend some time really thinking about what you want to write and do it in your own voice. But yeah, don't take shortcuts with that, because then it just becomes a chore and you're not really getting anything out of it. So that's a place where I would say, like, be anti AI. Just be a human being and be yourself, and you'll probably get a lot.
If you could go back to day one of Nap and Fire and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be? I don't know if this is going to create any anxiety, but I'm curious. As an entrepreneur, I mean, I think it's always fascinating, especially given all that you've already seen building Nap and Fire over the years.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because I always think I've thought many times about the twisting turning journey that I've taken. Even though it hasn't been a straight line by any means, I feel like all those twists and turns contributed in some meaningful way to getting to where I am now, and I really like that thing. So there's a piece of me that, I know I'm not trying to cop out or like not answer the question, but there's a piece of me that's like, well, I wouldn't change anything because I needed those experiences to figure out the things that I figured out, right? And that being said, if I was going to give myself a little advice, a little friendly advice, not try to change history, but a little friendly advice, it would probably just be a little bit like I said earlier, like just try to do one thing really well, because you can really burn a lot of time trying to do too many things at once. And it's so tempting, and there's just constantly some shiny object that you're like, well, if we also do this, we can get this new opportunity, or some customer asked us if we could do this, and yeah, sure, why don't we also do this? If you can just do one thing, and I know defining one thing is a little bit of that's its own little Pandora's box, but if you can really focus and narrow in on doing one thing really well for even a few years, you will probably have much more success in the long run just by that. And it doesn't mean you can only do that thing forever, but you'll build a reputation, you'll build connections, and you'll build experience, that a depth of experience that you won't get otherwise. The people I've seen who maybe are a little further ahead than where I am, I feel like followed that kind of advice. Really, just blocked out the noise, did one thing, got known for it, and that now opens up all kinds of new doors for you.
Yeah. And so, Claire, really to kind of close us out, and one thing that I always ask every one of our guests is, what is one thing that one of our listeners can do this week to help them either build their brand, their positioning, and all the things that you've shared today? What's one piece of advice that you can give to a listener to get started today?
I think if I really had to pick one thing, I would say, wow, there's like several things that I want to say right now. But if I have to pick one,
a couple.
Well, in the spirit of staying focused, I'll say, go talk to 5 customers. Go have 5 half-hour conversations with either your existing customers or your buyer, your prospect, and just listen to what they have to say. And don't come in with a point of view. Don't come in with a specific agenda. Don't try to sell them on anything. Just talk to them and listen to what their problems are, because I will bet you will find something in there that you didn't realize, or that you took for granted, or that you had an assumption about that might be a little bit off because you maybe haven't done it recently. And I think we could all be doing that probably weekly. But if you haven't done any research in a bit, you haven't talked to your customers in a bit, there you go. Take the opportunity and just talk to 5 people. And that, however much time that is, 2.5 hours, will be gold. It will be gold. I guarantee it.
Simple yet powerful. Thank you so much, Clay. I really appreciated this conversation. Thank you again for sharing your journey and your insights. I really appreciate you.
Appreciate you, Ed. I always love our chats. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So until next time, thank you again for everyone for joining Margin for Error, and we'll see you again soon.